Peter, the rock or the stumbling block? In Matthew 16, if you can remember, Jesus asked the apostles, "Who do people say that I am?" And they're all confused. And then Peter stepped forward and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus was so astounded by this that he said to Peter, "It's not flesh and blood that has revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I will rename you Peter, Cephas, meaning rock, and on this rock I will build my church." So from that moment on, we see Peter taking the most prominent position amongst the apostles. But remember later on in Matthew 16, Peter refused to accept that Jesus would have to go to the cross. And Jesus admonished him and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You're thinking like men think, not as God thinks." So I think it's very fitting in that, even in that verse, Matthew 16, Jesus, he makes him the rock, but also at the same time, a couple of verses later, he comes to the realization that Peter is a man, he's a creature tainted by original sin. So he will be weak. He's made of flesh, blood and bone. He's not divine. He's the rock of the church, but he's going to suffer the same weaknesses and failures and be subjected to the same moments when he walks away from Christ and does his own thing. You see this a wee bit later on in Galatians. St. Paul also admonished Peter because he was listening to the Pharisees. The Pharisees didn't like that he was eating with the uncircumcised. And Peter went along with the Pharisees and he stopped eating with the Gentiles, the uncircumcised. And Paul basically said, "What type of example are you showing? We're trying to create a church here of Jew and Gentile, and you refuse to sit down at a table and break bread with Gentiles. And you're listening to the Pharisees instead of listening to the teaching of Christ." So we have to ask the question, are popes infallible? I think when it comes to church teaching, I think we have to make the distinction that whenever a pope says or does anything which conflicts with the teaching of the church, we're not obliged to accept it. But we also have to recognize, on the other hand, that popes, although they are the rock of the church and they're the God's vicar on earth, they are human beings as well. So they will be prone to those moments like St. Peter was when he refused to accept Christ's message that he had to go to the cross. And also, don't forget, he denied him 3 times. And afterwards, beautifully, Christ asked him 3 times, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" So he cancelled out the 3 denials. And we can't argue it, especially after the ascension, how Peter led the church. After Pentecost, how Peter led the church. He was fearless. Eventually, we know, going to Rome and being crucified upside down because he didn't deem himself worthy to die the same death as our Lord. So he asked to be crucified upside down. And very, very interestingly, St. Peter's Basilica, named after the rock, if you go down into the bowels of the building and keep on going down, 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 down underneath the Vatican, it's widely recognized and believed that the rock upon which, Peter's tomb is there on Paul, and it's widely recognized that the rock on which Peter was crucified is below St. Peter's Basilica. So literally, Peter was the rock, weak and all as he was as a human being, with all his faults and failings. He was the rock upon which, literally, the church was built, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So we salute St. Peter, we salute St. Paul. We ask for their intercession today for our church and all the division that is in our church today between so-called conservatives and progressives. I think we have to stick as close to the gospel as possible, stick as close to the teachings of Jesus Christ, orientate our church to live as close as we can to the Beatitudes, recognize that we're human beings, we're creatures who will fall and fail, but thankfully we have the magisterium of the church, we have the sacraments, the sacrament of reconciliation, Jesus' sacramental presence on the altar. So let's love the church, faults and failings, weak human beings, tainted by original sin. You have to support our church. We have to speak up for our church and love our church. Because the Catholic Church is the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And in and under the bark of the church, we will find our way to heaven.